Looks like concrete. Tastes like concrete.
Casey Gray here from The Conscious Builder, and this is episode 5 of the 3-day cottage. If you missed the last episode, be sure to go back and check it out, where Jane Wilson, the architect, walked us through all of the design stages. In this episode, we get into ICF and some of the framing. We'll go through the pros and cons of ICF, as well as the details that we had to do for the envelope of the framing and the deck and porch roof. Be sure to like and comment below so other people can find out how to build a net zero cottage. And if you have any questions, we want to see those down below as well.
So I'm guessing you're going to be somewhere around here, right? We're not going to be able to go too far up.
That's right.
When we found out that we were going to have room to put in some sort of workshop, there were a few things that we had to consider. First, we needed to make sure that we had enough room for the 6 inches of ROCKWOOL comfort board under the slab. Next, we also needed to make sure that the foundation could handle the pressure of the fill of the slab on grade portion coming from the upper floor into that basement, because that's a lot of weight coming from up above and wanting to push downhill through that wall. And lastly, we needed to factor in the additional ICF and footings required to make this happen. Now, because we were building this cottage on the side of a hill, we want to make sure that that cottage isn't going to slide down that hill. So we had engineering details which told us how many dowels or steel rebar we had to put into the rock, how deep they had to go, and how far they had to be spread apart. And those had to be put in with an epoxy or a non-shrink grout to make sure they weren't going to go anywhere.
Today is concrete day number 1. The pads and footings are being poured for the foundation. This goes fairly quickly with the pump truck, and it'll be done in no time at all once they get going. And after this, they'll be stripping it and then getting ready to actually start forming the ICF, which stands for insulated concrete forms.
So after the footings were poured, it took about a day to strip all the footings, get all that wood out of the way before the team started to form the ICF. The reasons we chose ICF for this project were partly because of the complexity of the foundation and the fact that it was on the side of the hill, but also because of trades. Small towns like this typically don't have enough work for a residential forming company, for example, so you won't be able to get the forming companies in there. Plus, it's tough to use typical forms on a hill like this. So this is where ICF comes into play. And ICF is great because you can cut it to whatever you want. You can work with the footings and all the steps, and it's fairly easy once you've been trained on it. Obviously, there's training and you have to know what you're doing in order to install it, but once you've done all of that, it is fairly easy. The other great thing about ICF is that when the weather starts to get cold, we don't have to worry about the concrete because it's already insulated. See, concrete naturally produces heat as it's curing, so as long as you insulate it, it will cure properly. There are many manufacturers, but most insulated concrete forms are made up of polypropylene plastic ties secured with 2 layers of expanded polystyrene foam. The thickness of foam and space between the blocks will vary depending on what you need for your project. However, a standard block is typically about 2 5/8 of foam on either side and a 6-inch space or an 8-inch space in between. On this project, we were able to use a standard block, and a standard block has an R value of about R22. And that's low for a high performance home or a net zero home, but in the case where we were using it, it wasn't conditioned space. So it was around the slab, and we had insulation under the slab, so that's the slab on grade portion for the main floor, and then around the new shop that we have going in, and that is unconditioned space. Whether they choose to condition it later on, it's up to them, but as of right now, it's considered more like a garage than anything else. Some other benefits of using ICF is that once it's done, the sound transmission is fantastic. But as you're building it, you also don't have to strip all the forms. There are braces and planks that you have to remove because you need that to make sure that your wall is plumb and straight and so forth. However, you don't have an entire form to remove. And plus, now you already have your insulation. The drywall can technically be screwed right to this, and you put your, in this case, resistor on the outside for your damp proofing. Now, the downside is the fact that foam and concrete obviously has a large carbon footprint. So there are new concrete options coming out that have lower carbon footprint, and there are actually some ICFs out there that are not made with the same EPS foam. So you can actually have a wood fiber ICF form, for example. So do your research. If this is something that you're interested in doing, you can go with the ICF, typical ICF route like what you've seen here, or if you want to spend a little bit more and reduce your carbon footprint, you can go with some other options.
Hey, my name is Riley, and today we're going to be starting the framing process, which usually starts with leveling your plates, figuring out all those nice and flat, finding our high point and going from there. It's a lot easier to build up than build down once the concrete's poured. So framing should be a fun day.
The framing for the cottage was fairly typical in terms of stick framing, but there were some things that were outside of the building code and had to be engineered. The tall walls were the first thing that needed to be engineered. We also needed to pay more attention to air sealing details when we were framing to make sure we are installing the air barrier and tape where required during the framing process. For example, we had to put a strip of the Intello Plus behind the ledger boards for the loft, or else this would have been a major point of air leakage when we went to test the house. The trusses that were designed were also not ideal. They're designed to be able to move 1 3/8 on one side, which is just not possible. That blew my mind, because if a truss was sliding this much on a wall, the soffit would be popping out on the outside, and there'd be drywall pops or wood cracking, depending on what your interior finishes would. It would just be a disaster. So to solve this, we had the engineer spec some collar ties just for the great room section of the cottage.
Yeah, it's easier to walk around.
Oh man, I'm almost gassed out. Yeah, bring her down. There's the rope.
So originally I had the great idea of pulling the trusses up by hand. I figured we'd be able to do it. I've done it before, but I did not realize how heavy these trusses were going to be. So we quickly realized that we needed to change our plan. So once this happened, I got on the horn, found us a crane, and with the crane it was simple. We were ready for them when they showed up. So the layout was done, and the crane just had to drop them into place.
I had to take the carabiners, I'm not sure if that's what they're called, and hook them on to each side of the truss, and then they got hoisted up for the guys to start building the roof. And so it went pretty quick. Every time one set of trusses went up, I would sort of move my ladder. I had to get a ladder because I'm not that tall. I had to use a ladder to put it on the carabiners on each end. Once it went up, move the ladder out of the way, go and get some blocks of wood, put it in between the truss and the one behind it on both sides so that I could actually hook the carabiner the next time it came down. And there was also a rope that I had to attach to the one end so that I could hold it as it was being lifted so that it didn't turn and twist in the wind. And so it was just a continuous process. The guy who was working the crane was awesome. I can't remember his name, but he was great. I would be reaching up, and I might need like 2 inches because I just couldn't quite hook it. And he would just bring it down like 2 inches. I wouldn't even have to tell him. He could just see what I was doing. So it was pretty cool. It was a lot of fun.
About a quarter.
Coming over. Got the ladder. You got it?
Yep.
initial beep.
Don't you have to start off on your bowel movement section?
Sorry?
Don't you have to start on your bowel movement section?
No, our benchmark's already set.
Okay.
Bowel movement is what BHEM stands for.
Okay.
So we're good here.
Glad you tuned in to episode 5 here of the 3-Day Cottage. On the next episode, we're gonna continue the framing and get into window and door installations. If you wanna see more framing details, be sure to check out this video on another net zero build that we are doing. And until next time, remember to live consciously.
Now he's, did you catch that on film?